Support for the Capital Connection comes from New York State United Teachers, working to support students, educators, and public schools as the center of their communities through the Public Schools Unite Us initiative. Welcome to the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm David Gistina. Joining us this week is a special guest, Max Kenner. He is the founder and executive director of something called the Bard Prison Initiative. He's also vice president at Bard College. At BPI, Kenner holds the Tao Chair for Democracy and Education, and the Bard Prison Initiative creates the opportunity for incarcerated men and women to earn a Bard College degree while serving their sentences. You can read all about it at bpi.bard.edu. Max Kenner, welcome to the Capital Connection.
David, it's terrific to be here.
I want to start by letting our listeners know that many years ago, with the program just underway, and you're at 25 years now, I believe, with BPI, you came on WAMC. We did an hour-long interview, and it was fascinating to talk to you about how you, as an undergraduate, became involved with this idea, developed the Bard Prison Initiative. To see where it is today is quite something, and in many ways is going in the opposite direction we seem to be going when it comes to how we talk about criminal justice and issues like prisoners and whether they should have an education. Tell our listeners about how you became involved with BPI.
Sure. So this was all the way back in the 1990s. I was an undergraduate at Bard College at the time. I grew up in New York City, and a few things happened at once. First of all, having grown up in New York, the debate around criminal justice and policing, how the law interfaces with young people, questions of race and racism in the United States, all of these were very prevalent in the city at the time. And we were in the throes of the term didn't really exist yet, but what we now understand and what we now call mass incarceration. So leaving the city and coming up to the Hudson Valley, I realized, first of all, that I was making a trip that many other young men, mostly men, precisely my age, were making to go not to an institution like a liberal arts college, not an institution like Bard, but we're leaving the city to go up to the Hudson Valley to spend the best years of their lives in institutions designed to do the exact opposite of what a liberal arts college does. Restrict their freedom, restrict their future, restrict possibilities for what they might do as citizens, as members of their families, in their careers, etc. And all of this happened as I experienced in my personal life a real revelation in loving my engagement with a liberal arts education and thought that we can do more. We should do more in higher education to engage more kinds of people in different kinds of places. And back in 1998 and 1999, we could think of no more radical, no more transformative place to go to expand access to college education than our state prison system at the time.
So how did you get Bard to take on this massive task?
Well, it wasn't so massive at the beginning, and it was certainly unlikely. But after organizing any number of public events at the college, doing research on the issue, I made an appointment to meet with the leadership of the college, which ultimately agreed if we were able to raise the money, number one, and number two, this is critically important to everything we do, ensure that every credit and every degree that we offer in the prison is of the same standard, the same expectation, the same rigor as what happens on campus, that Bard might be willing to do this. And it's important as some background, David, to remember that as I was an undergraduate exploring this issue, a couple of things happened. First of all, the groundswell of support, not only from faculty, but particularly from other undergraduates at the time. Again, the term mass incarceration didn't really exist yet, but people of my age, people coming of age in the 1990s, fundamentally understood, they intuited that the questions of education and criminal punishment were central to our generation of Americans. And number two, in exploring what the relationship of the college and the prison system might be, I came across a history that I was completely unaware of and I don't think was especially well known. And that was the long history of engagement of colleges and universities in the United States over the course of decades. And only in 1994 and 1995, with the giant omnibus crime bill of that time, was college banned from prisons across the United States. Until 1994 and 95, there was college in virtually every state and federal prison in the country, with one of the largest systems of college and prison right here in New York State that was eviscerated at the peak of the tough on crime frenzy in the middle of the 1990s. So what we set out to do was restore some of that work, but also it was something that it was right at the core of the mission of the college. Not something charitable, not something separate, not a sideshow, but an expansion of genuine college access, which is what Bard College exists to do to begin with.
But what I'm hearing coming from you, Max Kenner, Executive Director of the Bard Prison Initiative, is a philosophy of restorative justice. In other words, you want to rehabilitate prisoners. The idea that people can make mistakes, there's all sorts of reasons for why and why they might end up in a prison, but that the goal should be to have the folks who go in come out better than they were. And that is not what we see in many cases in reality. And then there's the other side of it, which you see this hard line that's taken, including right now in this country, of retributive justice, the idea we're going to get you, we're going to punish you, and we're not going to give you anything but your basic needs.
Of course, we think that our prison systems, like all of our government institutions, should represent the best of our values. And of course, when we lock people away, provide them with no opportunity, typically they come back to their communities less prepared to make meaningful contributions and more likely to either commit more crime or to generally simply be dependent on their families or the government for support to survive. Those are things that we want to avoid. And frankly, for decades, there was a bipartisan consensus that we wanted to move in that direction to reduce prison recidivism and reduce the number of Americans in prison, period. But I also, David, want to suggest that there's a whole nother way of looking at this issue from the perspective of a college or a university. And that has nothing to do necessarily with American criminal justice and is simply focused on the reality that we have too few Americans engaged or enrolled in ambitious, serious higher education in the United States. It costs too much, the bureaucracy is too thick, and we as leaders in higher education must do more to be imaginative in going to where potential students are or might be and helping them become ambitious, creative, civic, intellectual business thinkers moving into the future. It's an incredible tragedy, but for decades in the United States, if we were looking for precisely that kind of talent across the country, our state prison systems would be one of the first places anyone should go looking for underengaged talent in the United States.
Yeah. Now, let's expand on this a little bit and tell us more about Bard's Prison Initiative. You mentioned in your remarks this is not a sideshow, and I'm sure that you get accused of, this can't be a real program. How can it be the same standards at Bard College? You must be pushing these people through to show success rates. Explain what makes this a quality program and why it's not so easy for folks to get in, and the reason why you can claim success later on.
It's not so easy to get in because demand within the prison is overwhelming. But once a student is admitted to the college, they enroll in an academic program that is identical in intensity, in breadth, and in academic expectation as what happens on Bard's main campus, where students come from high schools and often elite high schools from all over the country and, in fact, all over the world. Those students who may not have been in a formal classroom for years or often decades, but who feel a burning desire, a burning personal need to do more intellectually, to do more with their personal ambition, dive into this sort of college experience and do extraordinarily well. Attrition from the college is very, very low. The breadth of what students study is equal to what happens on campus. In fact, at the bachelor's degree level, at BPI, we offer associate's, bachelor's, and master's degrees, which we can talk about. But for students who choose a major and finish a bachelor's degree, the percentage of students in the prisons who complete degrees in STEM fields, in math or science, is greater than the percentage on BARD's main campus. And students who complete bachelor's degrees in the humanities or the social sciences write what we call at BARD a senior project, which is an original research paper, typically of 80 or 100 pages in length. And BARD students who are released from prison and go on to continue academic study after release have completed graduate degrees and PhDs at universities like Columbia, Cornell, Georgetown, Yale, you name it. So these students, despite all prejudice, accomplish all the kinds of things that undergraduates do anywhere else.
We're speaking with Max Kenner, founder and executive director of the Bard Prison Initiative and vice president at Bard College. You can read more at bpi.bard.edu. Max Kenner, it is quite something to realize that someone who is struggling and has ended up in prison can get into one of these programs and perhaps completely change their lives. But when it comes to these programs, I'm guessing many in the state don't even know they exist, including those who have relatives or friends or others who are incarcerated. Where are all of these schools? How do you reach the prisoners? How does it work?
So at BPI, which is now one of a number of college and prison opportunities in New York, decades ago we were one of just a much smaller number, but we've been able to restore this field thanks to the leadership of New Yorkers. This field is being restored nationally. We can talk more about the politics and that history if we have time. But it's important to say that everything we do, and this work is done best, not remotely, not via the mail, not via the internet or the tablets, but in person, in the same way higher education has been done for decades or, in fact, centuries. Interested people reading the same text, sitting around a table or a classroom and debating those ideas. So every day across 7 prisons in New York, 450 incarcerated New Yorkers engage with college faculty and with each other in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening in a course of study, again, that spans the full breadth of the liberal arts: math, science, history, anthropology, literature, studio arts, you name it. Students go on to complete an associate degree, then if they have time, a bachelor's degree, and just last year at Eastern Correctional Facility in the Catskills, we created our first master's degree for incarcerated New Yorkers.
Put a face on this for us, Max Kenner. Tell us a story about one of your students, a success story.
There is an awful lot of success to go around. The typical student used to be overwhelmingly from the 5 boroughs of New York City, though that geography has changed quite a bit, and the prison population much more commonly now represents people from upstate, from Albany, from Syracuse, from Rochester than it used to. The typical student at BPI did not finish high school, completed their GED in prison. The typical BPI student is the first person in their family to go to college. The typical BPI student is in their late 20s, 30s, or early 40s and has been out of the classroom for quite a long time. And the typical BPI student reports that they have never been in a classroom as engaging or as exciting or with as much enthusiasm from their fellow students as they experience in these classrooms. College faculty who participate in the program always report how these classrooms are as exciting and these students are as committed as students they have seen anywhere. And what's most wonderful to see after 25 years of doing this work is the hundreds of formerly incarcerated BARD students who leave prison and have gone back to their communities, again, first in New York City, but now all across the state and, in fact, all across the world, making extraordinary contributions that no typical person associates with the kinds of contributions, the kinds of positivity of people leaving prison. It shows how much more we can do with our prison system if we try, but it also shows what we can accomplish in the United States in higher education if we restore our belief in our colleges and our universities in the decades to come.
You know, I've been to 2 Bard College graduations now. I don't know if you noticed it, Max Kenner, but I did both times, that when they call the Bard Prison Initiative graduates to be recognized, they get the loudest round of applause. What's that about?
Yeah, I don't mean to be flip, but sometimes BPI is referred to on Bard's campus as the football team, and that can be, offhand comment. But what BPI represents on Bard's campus, I think, is a statement to the students, to the faculty, to the entire community, that we really mean that we are serious about bringing this kind of education to all kinds of people, irrespective of their academic history, irrespective of their academic success in the past, for all kinds of people who might succeed at it. And, at colleges, we always talk about, and anyone who goes to a college graduation like you have, David, hears about how important education is, how important college is in our society and for a person's success. But so often in higher education, leaders are hesitant to exhibit the kind of courage and take the kind of risk that bears that out. And I think at Bard, BPI conveys to the students, to the graduates, that Bard is as serious about the importance of a liberal arts education, is as serious about your education as a student on campus as it claims to be.
Yeah, in our current political discourse, I can't help but think that Max Kenner, executive director of the Bard Prison Initiative, that your statements about higher education and about getting academics and higher education into the prison system would be called woke. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago, back in February, you were writing about the crisis in the prison system. We have had terrible prison abuse. We had a prisoner murdered at the Marcy Correctional Facility, Mr. Brooks. And then you had, shortly after, strange timing, I would add, the strike by correctional officers. That wildcat strike was shut down by the governor. We lost 2,000 workers who did not come back on the job. And obviously, the staffing, quote, crisis has to impact your programs.
To be sure. And there's a lot there and a lot to answer to. I would say there were, in fact, not one, but tragically 2 murders in the prisons, Robert Brooks and Messiah Nontwi. And the strike that followed, indeed, is bound up in all of the crisis and all the uncertainty about what kinds of prisons we should have in New York and across the country. The staffing crisis, I do want to say, is a real thing. And the staff at the prisons who are getting stuck with shifts that are 12 or 18 or before the strike, sometimes 24 hours, is under enormous pressure and working conditions that are not sustainable. But it's up to us as voters and decision makers in New York to imagine a better kind of prison system where more people want to work and produce better results for New Yorkers moving into the future. And I think there's a legacy in New York that shows that education has to be at the center of that new and different kind of prison system. And when we do education in the prisons, it can be as ambitious and as broad as education anywhere.
Well, what happened with the prison reform package in the legislature?
This past session?
Yes.
Look, the staffing crisis led to the strike that was one of the most radical labor events in the history of New York State. The prison system completely shut down. And I would say that, for us who work in the prison system as civilians, not as staff or as security, we have yet to fully recover from the lockdowns and the shutdowns around COVID. The uncertainty and the unpredictability of work in the prisons has been relentless. We're now waiting for 2 or 3 more prisons to be closed, as was approved in the budget, the governor's budget. And hopefully with those closures, there will be some relief in the prisons where many people are trying to do some good work. But, there's going to be some political courage required on the part of the governor, the legislature, and all the decision makers in New York, again, to really reimagine what can happen in the prisons in our state. We've done very well, and we deserve some celebration in that we have reduced the size of the prison system in New York by more than half. Violent crime is radically down in New York City and across the state by any measure. Certainly radically down from 25 years ago when we got started and when we had 73,000 people nearly in state prison systems. Now we're closer to 32,000 people in state prison systems. But violent crime is also down from the spike during the COVID period. So there's lots to be proud of in New York and the progress we've made in ending mass incarceration and reducing violent crime. But the impacts that the prison system has on people who work in them and who are forced to live in them, the cost that they impose on the taxpayer, and the outcomes for all of us are all places where we can do better.
What is it about the way Americans get their information? Has it something to do with the media? I'll blame myself for a minute, Max Kenner. The media often looks to the negative. That's what the news is, the unusual, the conflict, not that the plane landed safely at the Albany airport today. And then despite the numbers that we keep seeing and hearing about crime so much better, that the average person doesn't buy it, that they experience the fear of worry, and certain politicians and parties that constantly stoke and stir up that negative stew. You'd think we'd be in a better place, but it feels like we're in a worse place.
Yeah, you know better than I do about how Americans get their news and what they hear. There's no question we can do radically better in all kinds of different ways. But what I would say that we've learned in 25 years of work at the Bard Prison Initiative is how low our expectations are of one another and how radically well people can do when we expect more of them in the classroom. And that's not a liberal message, and that's not a conservative message, but it is a hopeful message. So as people consume news and as people worry about crime and as higher education continues to experience the crisis that's been in now for decades, we live in a country where a college or a university closes nearly every week. Let's imagine higher education that is both radically more democratic, radically more accessible, but also radically more ambitious. Those combination of things are not mutually exclusive. Being ambitious, being democratic, being accessible are qualities that can and should go together in American education. Because something is free does not mean it's cheap, and we can provide education at the college level in new and different places for students who typically have been written off for decades and will do extremely well if we believe in them.
He is Max Kenner, founder and executive director of the Bard Prison Initiative. Read all about it at bpi.bard.edu. Max Kenner, thank you so much for joining us on the Capital Connection. I hope you'll come back in the future and talk more.
David, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for all you do at WAMC.
Support for the Capital Connection comes from New York State United Teachers, working to support students, educators, and public schools as the center of their communities through the Public Schools Unite Us initiative.